Mom, pay attention. I'm in a motel right now, having divorced Robert. But I'll be bringing Linda over to your apartment, my daughter Susan said, cutting me off before I could say anything more confused. A few days later, Susan came home, toting heavy luggage. Her daughter Linda was wearing a travel backpack. They both took off their shoes and went inside. Mom, is there place for me? She said as she walked into the living room. Susan looked puzzled when she saw Mary, her brother's wife, among the welcoming family. She clicked her tongue slightly. Why are you here? James interjected before she had a chance to consider his question. Now, the two of them share a residence. James said, it makes sense that she's here. Susan became enraged at this and asked, what are you doing, lounging about my house like it's yours? Ludicrous, someone who lives with us and merely spends money. It's crowded with you around here, where we will be living from now on. Keep your dropout foolishness away from the children. Leave now. Mary stopped, her smile disappearing. It was obvious that Susan detested and looked down on Mary. She motioned for her to go. This behavior infuriated everyone more and intensified the confrontations between James and John. But Mary was the one to speak up first. I get it. I'll head off as soon as Susan says I can. After hearing this, Susan grinned contentedly and said, see, you're reasonable. Just give me some time. People like you don't belong in this house, Mary murmured as she dropped her head and carefully left the living room. I raced after her, attempting to stop her by holding her elbow, but Mary would not listen and she immediately began packing her things. I got an idea while Mary was packing, and I muttered something to her in private, well then, if that's how it is, because it seemed unfair to her as she had done nothing wrong. My name is Karen, and I'm a housewife approaching the age of 55. My son, John, got married last spring, and the wedding was held in our home. Mary is a lovely person, always happy, bright-cheeked, and pleasant-natured. She's petite, with long flowing hair. Originally, they lived apart, but when John's job moved, it made sense for them to move in with us since it was closer to his place of employment. They've been living together for roughly 6 months. When they first proposed moving in, neither James nor I objected, but I was concerned about Mary's reaction because, well, I'm her mother-in-law. James said to me one night, don't you think you worry too much? Mary actually isn't like that. Mary is good at sewing, right? John said that, and you enjoy knitting, so you two should get along, James replied with a hopeful tone. Yes, sharing interests could make our friendship stronger more quickly. I therefore eagerly anticipated their relocation day. John wasn't at work the day they arrived, and they arrived in a moving truck. Mary handed over a packet of sweets as soon as she arrived, saying, oh, this is for you. We're here to cause trouble. To my surprise, when I opened it, there was a variety of well-known candies inside. You didn't have to go to such trouble. No, I had to bring something. We'll be inconveniencing you, Mary responded. We were both a little stiff and anxious for about a week after that day. You inconvenience not at all. The house is small, but please make yourself at home. Thank you. But we became more comfortable with one another as we discussed knitting. Mary became giddy as she discussed the nearby craft shop. There were countless discussions regarding the satisfaction of finishing a project. In elementary school, Mary picked up sewing skills. She came from a children's home where the workers saw her skill and taught her how to sew. She has no family. Mary began by stitching buttons and over time discovered that she enjoyed creating items like tiny bags and aprons for kids. She developed the ability to make nearly anything over time, including tote bags and clothing. Her smile was bright and somehow made me feel younger and more energetic. As an adult, I started to enjoy making things, and now I can make just about anything, from clothes to tote bags, she added. Mary was also really considerate. She began preparing coffee for James every night after learning that he enjoyed it after supper. She also cleaned the storage shed, tended to the garden, and cleaned the area around the water taps. Mary was loved by James as though she were his own daughter. Mary's admission that she was a dropout was the one thing that disturbed me. She had to start working directly after middle school since she couldn't afford to go to high school when we were alone. I told her to not worry, but I wasn't sure if that actually eased her concerns. It's likely that Mary was self-conscious about it because Susan, her sister-in-law, made fun of her. 3 years older than John, Susan possessed a nasty streak that no amount of reprimanding could overcome. Susan attended college and worked for a large bank. She would approach wealthy guys at dinner parties with friends and acquaintances, either to go on a date or end a relationship. Her reputation for frequent relationship failures was likely a result of her challenging personality. If she didn't change, I was scared no one would marry her. However, that concern was unwarranted. A few years ago, when she first presented her fiancé, he worked in internal medicine at a prominent hospital and hailed from a family of doctors. James and I assumed she would stop bothering us. But even afterwards, when she would get together with family, she would say things like, "My brother is so presumptuous," about John. Susan always had complaints about Mary. "Is this girl John's wife? She looks so plain," Susan would utter. "Susan, please don't be so rude," I would tell her. Susan laughed mockingly, but she never altered her attitude, not even when James and I stated, "Think of us as your real family." I remember her sarcastic laughing, "Seriously, Dad, Mom, a stupid family like this is impossible." Susan would not stop calling, showing off her money and boasting about her trip to a foreign country, her fine dining, and the beautiful handbag she received as a present. My granddaughter Linda also has a tendency to boast. I believed it would be best to stop her from doing so, but every time I attempted to tell her, "Don't meddle in our parenting," she would become angry and I would be helpless. Susan was a difficult daughter. Another boast, I suppose, I mumbled to myself as I took Susan's call one lovely fall day, used to life with John and the others. When I answered, I heard Susan sobbing, saying, "Mom, listen. I separated from my spouse." I was left wondering where to welcome them when Susan said, "I'm staying at a hotel right now, and I'm coming over with, but please, bye." Before I could say anything else, Susan hung up. That day, I cleaned my room and cleared out half the closet, figuring it would be small, but they had to stay here. Mary came back from shopping and was surprised to see what I was doing. "How come you're clearing up your room?" "Linda and Susan are returning. She is presently divorced. Since there's no room, they'll use mine." "What? Where are you going to sleep then?" "I'll make room in my room, so sleep there." "What are you saying? Now is the time for you to look for yourself." "I'll sleep in the living room." Susan and Linda returned a few days later, still not knowing anything. We've arrived home. Linda had a travel backpack, and Susan hauled a large luggage. They both took off their shoes and went inside. "Mom, is there place for me?" As they entered the living room, they saw Mary, John, James, and me simply having fun as a family. Mary said, With a gentle tongue click, Susan said, "Why are you here?" Susan was about to say anything when James said, "Susan, these two are living with us now." "Nah. It makes sense. Also, Robert filled us in on every detail regarding your predicament." While we were getting the room ready in the days that followed, James and I also spoke with Robert to find out the reasons for the divorce, which surprised us both. "Susan, you were in charge of your husband's wallet, spending lavishly on trips abroad and designer bags, leaving most household chores to a service." Susan was uneasy. "He even doubted whether those trips were really just with Linda, suggesting you might have been with friends." "What? Now what? I'm over coming back here and getting divorced. This is not what I want to hear." "Yes, I do have a room." With a heavy sigh, Susan started to head upstairs with her suitcase, but James and I stopped her. "Hold on, let's wrap up this discussion. Tell the truth to us." "The truth does not exist. He is telling lies. Linda was always along when my buddies and I went on trips. It's only a small financial outlay. It's not insignificant. The issue is, Mary entered while she was witnessing this, her hair trembling nervously." "James, let's stop there. We can discuss at a later time. Susan must be worn out. Mary smiled and added, please, go to your room. I know Susan didn't think highly of me, but she chose to diffuse the situation and touched my heart with her magnanimity. But Susan's expression became even more agitated. What? Settling down and cohabiting with a money squanderer? It's crowded now that we're here due of your ignorance. It reaches the children. Leave now. Mary's smile faded as she took in the harshness of the comments, and James, John, and I had to respond sharply to Susan. Susan, please say sorry to Mary. How awful it was to say that. It's terrible. Mary is not a money waster or a foolish person. Being around such pricks annoys me. Susan gave a wave and revealed the back of her hand as though to indicate, go away. Her actions infuriated James and John even more. We never agreed to. You coming back in the first place, they said. Do you get that? But it's only fitting that I return, this is my folks' home. Sis, even if this is your parents' home, returning in this manner is unconscionable. How are you going to pay for living costs? I take it you left your job? All right, that's correct. I'll take a temporary leave of absence from work so that Linda and I can be supported by John and Dad while I look for work. Can Mom look after Linda? This is how Susan has always been, she is really conceited. I was hesitant to welcome her back because of this. Hey, just to be clear, where are you hoping to obtain employment? Linda's preschool year is almost here. How about taking her home? How am I meant to predict when I'll land a job? And once they get to work, you will pick up Linda, right, Mom? That's much better than using, Susan, we can't just do it at your request. Seems intent on staying here and relying on us to take care of Linda and herself. Unable to follow the grown-ups' debate, Linda cried and screamed in an attempt to catch their attention. That's the way things will work out. It seemed as though time had frozen for a second, and everyone was taken aback by her attitude. Mary then spoke up without warning. Comprehensive. Please give me some time, if Susan says so, I'll be leaving shortly. Susan grinned happily when she heard this, saying, you see, that's really understanding of you. You are aware that you are an annoyance in this home. Mary bowed her head and slowly walked out of the living room. I hurried to stop her, grabbing her arm, but Mary would not listen to me and continued packing her belongings. I felt helpless, wondering if there was anything I could do, because Mary had done nothing wrong. I had a thought while Mary was packing, so I whispered something to her, if that's how it works. Weeks after Susan had returned, the evenings and mornings had gotten colder, the leaves in the local park had begun to turn, making it feel like fall. Mary had moved into a new place, completed the viewings, signed the lease, and began packing up her things. Linda had taken to pointing and laughing at people, and Susan was happy about that. Linda, quit pointing at individuals. Linda grumbled about the meal Mary and I made, spitting it out like it was a game, and the mess the home was in from playing in the sandbox. Despite my reprimands, she looked to be having fun, sticking out her tongue and giggling. It was useless. To talk to Susan, don't you believe it's good for kids to be active? Mom, don't you? I was too exhausted to argue, even though I wanted to explain that wasn't the point. The house was a complete mess, but with a little more patience, it would all be over, even though James and John were still at odds with Susan. After helping Mary unpack at her new place one Sunday night, I got a call from Susan. I had gone to the new place with Mary, James, John, and Susan during the day, leaving her home alone. I guess she got impatient waiting for us to come back and called. Hey Mom, tell me when you're returning. After doing the laundry, Linda undoubtedly wants to go to bed as well, and I'm hungry. My harsh response was, we're not coming back there. Don't fool around. Susan was throwing invective on the other end of the phone, astonished. By what do you mean? I'm not aware of this. Return and prepare dinner, and other crude remarks of that nature. From a mother? I see. So that dropout moron is blaming me, am I? Is this the dumb dropout you're talking about? Why does it turn out this way? Didn't you say the dropout idiot was Mary? I'm a dropout too. At that moment, the other end of the phone went silent. Perhaps it's more accurate to say she was speechless because you said you couldn't stand being with the dropout, right? Well, Dad and I are dropouts too. We've decided to move out as well. There was a little pause before Susan began to apologize. I never said anything like that. Besides, you'll miss Linda if you don't come back, right? It doesn't matter what your and Dad's educational backgrounds are. Please come back. I don't want to be with a daughter who judges people by their education alone. Linda has been left with her father, so there's no need to worry. Linda, we had taken Linda out shopping and handed her over to Robert. On the way, he had wanted to take custody when he brought up divorce, but it seems Susan had taken and hidden her before any proper discussion. That's why we didn't immediately return home and stayed in a hotel for a while. Give Linda back. You hardly disciplined Linda and left her mostly to her own devices. That's not parenting. She deserves a proper education in a proper family. Susan kept screaming, even after I hung up the phone, and she called again. I put down my phone and set it to ignore her calls. I looked up and saw Mary's worried eyes. I gave her a thumbs up and grinned. Mary comfortably smiled back, saying, "It's okay." We had gotten to know the neighbors rather well a week after moving in. Mary and I used our slightly bigger new home for daily activities like cooking, cleaning, and sewing and knitting. The proximity of a craft store and a monthly sewing and knitting club were among the factors that attracted us to move here. Both the teachers and the students were friendly and inviting when we first arrived. "Mary, I'm thinking of setting up a booth at the handmade market in the neighboring town this year. How about joining me?" I asked her one afternoon. She answered, "I don't have to participate," but she did, and with support from our club members. We are currently getting goods ready for the market. After a while, Susan, who had been living at her parents' house, moved into a dilapidated apartment. The house was rented for a rather high monthly fee after a month or two. The utilities and rent were family-friendly, of course, and Susan had been depending on James and John's income. Thus, it's likely that she lacked the funds necessary to pay for these charges. Eventually, she had to move out on her own and into an apartment. It would have been challenging to raise Linda in such circumstances, as Susan was effectively jobless. Even the possibility of homelessness for mother and daughter existed. At first, severing Linda from her mother proved to be quite difficult. However, based on the outcome, it appears that leaving her with Robert was the right choice. I had assumed Susan wouldn't bother us anymore, but James and I were both surprised to receive a letter from Robert recently. It was discovered that Robert's child support payments for Linda were really being used to pay for nightclubs. Robert had employed a detective to make sure Linda was receiving the child support, given his knowledge of Susan's extravagant spending patterns. As I read that letter, I thought back to how Susan would sometimes go back to her parents' place to look for a job or go out to dinner with friends, and sometimes she wouldn't come back until the next morning. She had obviously been having a good time, but I questioned where she had found the money to engage in such activities. I never thought she was really spending the night drinking and going to those kinds of locations. A part of me yearned for my own daughter to be real. The letter went on to say that Robert planned to sue Susan for damages after finding out the truth. It appeared from the date that payments had already begun. Not only had I not heard from Susan, but because she was making such large payments, I was unable to offer her any support or sympathy. Linda's custody was given to Robert since it was seen to be challenging for her. I was a little relieved, figuring she would get the right education and discipline from a family of doctors. Above all, I thought Robert was a very kind and compassionate young man who had a great affection for kids. Even though I don't see Linda as often these days, she must be comfortable. Mary brought in some coffee at the exact moment my pen stopped working, when I was considering how to respond to the letter. "Karen, I've made some coffee." "Oh, thank you so much." I grinned a little as I sipped the steaming coffee and pondered about the letter some more. "What's up?" I was thinking about what to write next. Among other things, I wrote about how the four of us are living peacefully together and not talking to Susan. However, I still have something else to speak about. That relates to Mary's unborn child. Following the transfer, just when we thought things had calmed down, Mary's health took a turn for the worse. Her pregnancy was discovered during a hospital visit. Her belly was beginning to protrude, and she was about 3 months along. We are ecstatic about the prospect of adding a new family member, even if we are unsure of the gender yet. Mary is full of energy. I'll make clothes for the baby, and I'm planning to knit hats and socks. That's what I said in my letter. Mary said, I wonder if I can be a good mother. She looked down and stroked her belly. Please take care not to overdo it. Take good care of yourself. I thought the same thing, but it'll be fine. The baby in your belly will grow and be born healthy. They'll wear the clothes you make, so don't worry, as if I were telling my own daughter. Mary said quietly as she nodded slowly, yeah, you're right. I pretended not to see, though. The handcrafted goods market is rapidly approaching. The market's subject is Christmas presents. We have already been given the most precious and priceless gift of all.